Hello, NYWCites, and seeing that Psycho Circus 18 is coming up, I've decided it's time for a DVD review, as I will be reviewing Psycho Circus, which took place back on January 27th of 2007. Now, this was a very good show, but I attended, and I do have the DVD. Funny side story here, folks. I remember that very night I got off the train at Deer Park Station and I got into the cab. There were usually taxi drivers. They know what time the trains stop in the area, so they usually are right there waiting to see if any passengers need to take a cab somewhere. This is long before Uber and Lyft came along. And while I'm in the cab waiting, a young lady comes into the cab, and she's like right behind the driver's seat. Eventually, the driver of the vehicle we're sitting in comes into the car, and he asks the lady where she's going, and she mentions the address of what is now the defunct Deer Park Community Center. When the driver then asked me where I'm going, and after hearing her say the address, I told him the same exact place. So we arrive, and she and I actually began to talk. She said that her brother was supposed to go to the show with her, and eventually, but he decided not to go, and we introduced ourselves to each other, and we talked as we were waiting to get in. Greg Stengel, who owned the DPCC, he came out the door, and by this point, Stengel, I believe, was no longer involved in NYWC matters. But he came outside and basically said there'd be two separate lines, one for ticket holders and those that were walk-ups that were coming to buy their tickets at the door. So eventually they let the ticket holders in first because, they already have their tickets, so it would be much easier for them, I suppose. And then we, among the walk-ups, the lady and I, we go inside, we get inside, we go in the hallway. To my surprise and delight, the lady actually not only stayed by me. We sat together for the show, even though it was all the way in the back row. And for those who remember the Deer Park Community Center, you remember how small that place was, and we were like, almost everybody was like jammed in there like sardines. I remember at one point, they had to start letting people in through instead of, there was no room to get in to the point where they had to start letting people in through the other doors. There was like, two side doors leading into the room where the shows would take place. This lady, by the way, she told me she was a big fan of Jerry Lynn and Papa Don, because she told me that like her first show was the previous April, which was that one show Tito Santana and the late King Kong Bundy had appeared. And that, by the way, yes, and by the way, that very show was actually the very first show of one of my favorite NYWCites, Jessica. That was her first show, too. I didn't meet Jessica until years later, of course. But she also said, I think she also was at the show in September of 2006 when Jerry had lost the Hi-Fi Championship to Plasma, who later became Trent Beretta. Well, before the action got underway, Nick Vrona, who was ring announcing at the time, and he did a great job with the NYWC website in those days, he announces the crowd that the recent losses, that about a week before the show, Bam Bam Bigelow had passed away, and I believe a day or two before this show happened, Doug Gentry, who was Rob Feinstein's longtime business partner in RF Video, had also passed on. They did a 10-bell salute for both Bigelow and Gentry. And then the action all began with history in the making. The first ever Joker's Wild Battle Royal, which basically has become a Psycho Circus tradition, as we know, over the years. And this was where they said that the winner of the match would get a shot at any championship they desire at any time. Among the participants for this matchup were Southern Vinny Stylen, who had returned for the first time since 2005, and Vinny eventually, years later, passed away. Stockade, long before he was a Devil's Outlaw or a Deathmatch's Guardian. Bruno Marciano, Spider, Havoc. Representing the Foreign Legion was Francois Lin, who we know as Robert Franklin, who has gone under various identities in NYWC history. Ahmad Ali, and Ahmad Jihad Akbar, who we know as Hot Stuff Eddie, who I know as Eddie Guapo from the Doghouse in Brooklyn. Other participants, actually, these guys, actually, no, another one. Other participants, Tara Charisma, JT Tackleberry, who we know as Kaysen, Oscar, not the Grouch, the Sheet Medalist, don't know who that was, and we had a few debuts. Making their debuts this night was Alex Reynolds, before he was Yours Truly or the Handsome Devil. Alex Moore, who later became a member of the Dirty Rednecks, as well as one half of the original Reckless and Wasted. Steve Scyther, who just went by Scyther a few months after this event. Matt Connors, I don't think he lasted too long in the business. Joe Etel, way before he was indestructible. The match began with the Sheet Medalist laughing. Right after the bell rings, the Sheet Medalist was laughing at Tara Charisma, and she responded by slapping him in the face and throwing him over the top rope, causing him to be the first one eliminated. And then a short time later, many ganged up on Francois Lin in the corner, eliminating him. There's way too much to remember here, folks. I don't know if I mentioned Spider was in this matchup or not. But eventually it boiled down to the Greek god Papa Don and Ahmad Jihad Akbar. And Papa Don looked right at Akbar, and he goes, U-S-A! U-S-A! And the crowd followed suit with that, and Papa Don eventually eliminated Akbar to win the first ever Joker's Wild Battle Royal, which enabled him to get a shot at any championship of his choosing at any time. Second matchup of the night, we saw Josh Daniels challenge Ken Scampy, accompanied to ring by Foxy Foxy, for the Interstate Championship. The show before, a month before this, Scampy defeated Daniels and Papa Don, a three-way match to win the championship, and this was Daniels basically getting his rematch, where can't really remember too much about this match, but one highlight, Daniels basically gave a really hard slap or chop to Foxy's backside after lifting up whatever skirt she had on, some type of mini skirt or whatever she had on. Scampy put Daniels down with this cool maneuver. I can't remember. I don't know what the proper name is, but Scampy won and retained the Interstate Championship. Next up was a match that stemmed from the previous month's show, as the Outcast Killers, Oman Tortuga and Diablo Santiago, challenged the Dead Presidents, Boog Washington, Boogaloo, and Lowrider, Low Lincoln. What happened was, a month before this, the Presidents were coming to the ring for a match. The Killers were in the crowd taunting and bad-mouthing them to the point where they got into a big brawl. And as the Outcast Killers were making their way to the ring for this match, the Presidents came out, attacked them from behind, and eventually the Dead Presidents defeated the Outcast Killers to retain the Tag Team Championship. Up next was a five-way elimination matchup, which saw Benny Martinez versus Quiet Storm versus Javier versus Dan Barry versus the Grim Reaper. Very good matchup by these five guys. And at one point, as Quiet Storm was coming out for his matchup, There was this one fan in the crowd. He kept heckling Storm, calling him Oompa Loompa, telling him that he sucks balls. And at one point, the guy sees he's on camera, and he points at Storm and says, "He sucks balls." I mean, dude, if you've actually seen a guy do that, I don't want to know about it. But the match was on, and it came down to Dan Barry and Javier ended up pinning Dan Barry in what I believe was supposed to be determined a number one contender to the Hi-Fi Championship. Can't remember everything, folks, but I know they did go to they did go to intermission to set the ring up for the Psycho Circus match. There was no cage for this. It was just a hardcore match with a War Games twist, as we know. And this was a historic Psycho Circus match because this was the first ever 6-on-6 Psycho Circus matchup. On one side, we had Jerry Lynn, Mason Rage, Plasma, who was Hi-Fi champion at the time. Plasma later became Trent Beretta. Maverick, who we know today as 205 Live star premier athlete Tony Nese. And the BS Express of Tony Burma and Mike Spinelli as they did battle with then champion Dickie Rods, Mega before he was king, the Angus brothers, Billy and Danny, Dan Dynasty, and Jamie Van Leemer. Very brutal matchup, which saw bloodshed, and the eliminations were as follows. Plasma pinned Jamie Van Leemer. I forgot who pinned Plasma, but one of the Angus brothers jumped off a ladder and stomped Plasma in the head, and I forgot who pinned Plasma to eliminate him from the match, which made it 5 against 5. Jerry Lynn eliminated Dan Dynasty with a cradle pile driver through a table. Mega, I don't know if these next two eliminations are in order or not, but Mega speared Jerry Lynn through a table, and Mega pinned Maverick with a chokeslam onto a ladder laying on 2 chairs. Both Angus brothers rolled up and pinned Mason Rage. The BS Express put both Angus brothers through a table. Mega powerbombed Burma through a table. At one point, the same table that the Angus brothers were put through, Mega tried to chokeslam Mike Spinelli off the apron onto that broken table, but Mason Rage comes out and he and Mega brawl, and Mega never comes back to the ring for this matchup. And Spinelli, he and Dickie Rods were left alone by themselves, and eventually Rods had barbed wire wrapped around his arm. He jumped off the top rope, dropped an elbow which had barbed wire around it, pinned Spinelli to not only win the Psycho Circus match for his team and retain his championship, and also officially Dickie and Mega were the survivors of this matchup. Brian Vitko, who was then the acting commissioner, he's applauding Dickie for the victory, but then all of a sudden, the lights in the room go out, the lights come back on, and we see Preacher John Cannon, I think was his name. He had makeup on, and I don't know if he dyed his hair or not. What happens is, Cannon's got the microphone. He says, "I told you, he has left us, but he will return. And tonight, he has returned." The lights go out again. The lights come back on, and we see in the ring Crusher Dugan, who last month had passed away just 2 days before last month's Sideshow. He's in the ring, and that was Dugan's first time seen in NYWC for the first time since the previous summer. And Vitko and Rods are relieved that it's Dugan in the ring with them. Vitko says, "Crusher, you look well rested." And he says, "Everyone, let's have a big round of applause for the former commissioner of the New York Wrestling Connect." Dugan takes the microphone and says, well. The last time I looked, I was still the commissioner. Someone in the crowd said, "Yeah," so they kind of sensed the face turn right then and there for Dugan. Dugan says, "I'm not the surprise. Rods, your opponent next month has returned." And both Dugan and Cannon are laughing hysterically Vitko had taken the microphone. I couldn't hear what he said because, it seemed like the microphones weren't so great in those days. But then all of a sudden, a hole burst through the ring, grabbing rods and pulling him through the hole, much like The Undertaker did to Diesel years ago at an In Your House pay-per-view. Rods comes out of the hole in the ring, seemingly bleeding, and then emerging from that hole is Mikey Whipwreck, who had not been seen since the previous summer, and basically a shocking ending to this great show, and that's pretty much how it ended. It was like quite a cliffhanger with the returns of both Dugan and Whipwreck to this to NYWC on this very show. Yeah, as I said, this was a great Psycho Circus event from long ago. And I think it was very good, and it was one of those earlier Psycho Circus matches which really paved the way for and made and you understand why this wild and crazy match always lures in the crowd every year, and this was I think it was a good show, and sad. And as the crowd began to die out, unfortunately, I gave that lady a hug, and looking back, I should have asked her for her phone number because because here I am. As I said, this show took place back in January of 2007. Here I am 13 years later, and I haven't seen that chick ever since. Be a miracle if I ever saw her again, I'll tell you that, folks. But let me know what you all thought of this review of a past Psycho Circus event. And I can't wait for Psycho Circus 18, which is coming up. So, I want to say, NYWC rules.